Hi everyone, welcome to the First Coach Café. Today I would like to talk about tendons and ligaments, mainly because I see more and more injuries around tendons and ligaments, and I see a lot of runner's knee, I see a lot of sprained ankles, and so it's always a question, what do we do, how can we prevent them? And the other reason is because I've been hearing a lot of myths that I think I would like to debunk. From our sports school athletes this week, they were talking about different forms of stretching and what it does. And so I would like to address this for all the coaches and athletes in Northern BC. So let's get started. Is stretching protective for your tendons and ligaments? A lot of people say that if they stretch, their tendons and ligaments will be better and the risk of injury is improved. And so the answer is no. Passive stretching is actually not recommended and is not protective for sprains for ligaments, so like any kind of ligament damage or rupture or anything like that. And actually it's making the situation worse because, and we're going to go in a little bit of details, you have these two things in your muscles and your tendons and ligaments. But before I get ahead of myself, let's just kind of review tendon ligament. So you have the bone, and the bone, what's going to attach the muscle to the bone is a tendon. And so the tendon is going to be attached to the bone and to the muscle. Okay? And so when we're talking like, does stretching help to prevent tendon injuries and ruptures? The reason is no, because in the tendon, I have something called the Golgi tendon apparatus, and its job is to protect the system. And so when it feels like there's too much tension, it will just shut the muscle down. So I don't know if you've ever done any like bounding or plyometrics, and you're coming down and you feel like your leg's just going to give out underneath you. Typically that happens when you start to do bounding, and the reason why your leg gives out underneath you is because that Golgi tendon apparatus felt like there was too much tension and that it could damage the system. And so it's quite protective. We have this other thing now that's not in the tendon, but it's in the muscle, and it's called a muscle spindle. And what it does is that when it feels a certain amount of tension, it contracts the muscle. And so these two things work together to basically make sure that the tension is right in the muscle when you're running, when you're doing plyometrics and different things like that. Now when you're sustaining, so we're talking about passive stretching here because there's things like dynamic stretching, which people often do in warm-ups. We're talking about passive stretching, which would be like stretching and holding the position for a long time. Basically you're overriding the reflexes and the signals that is given by the Golgi tendon apparatus in the tendon and from the muscle spindle that's in the muscle. And so what that does is that it inhibits some of the reflexes. Say I land from a jump. It's inhibiting some of the reflexes that would produce co-contractions. So basically contractions of the muscle around the joint that would stabilize the joint. And what this does is that it puts way more strain on the tendons. The other thing too is when I do a lot of passive stretching, in this new range of motion that I have, do I have the strength and the motor control to actually have control and strength and resiliency of the structures in this new range of motion? Often not. And so I don't encourage passive stretching for those reasons. I think passive stretching can be used for different reasons, but if we're looking for protection of tendon and ligaments, I would not recommend passive stretching. And so what do we do then with tendons and ligaments? Well, a couple of years ago, I have a friend who's a very, very good rock climber, and he told me about this protocol that he had come across, which was from Emil Abrahamson. And so these are rock climbers, and so for those of you who know rock climbing, they'll use fingerboards, and these boards have like little lats, and they latch on with their fingers and they try to stay there for as long as possible. And it's interesting to look at rock climbers because say when you're like gripping onto these boards, there's very long tendons that allow you to do so, and a lot of little ligaments that pulleys that help these tendons to stay there. And so if you're able to stay there for longer, if you're able to attach to the fingerboard, and if you're able to sustain more load, it means that these tendons and ligaments are getting stronger. So it's really, really interesting to look at this. And with this protocol that that Emil Abrahamsen, he's a Norwegian rock climber, put together, the improvements were noticed in the rock climbing community. So I started looking at this, and then I fell upon the work of Keith Barr. And what we'll be talking today about is really kind of a summary of his research. And he's at UC Davis, and he's a researcher that really specializes in tendon, ligament, bone, cartilage, and muscle, and how these structures basically are influenced by training and also different nutritional strategies that we can use to try and inform how we can make them more resilient, these structures more resilient. So, let's address another myth. Tendons and ligaments, they're less vascular than muscle, and so there's this belief that actually the turnover of the proteins that constitute them is really, really slow. And so there's interesting work from Luc van Loom, where they use durated water so they can label the proteins, and they actually shown that the protein turnover is quite quick. So where am I going with all this? We talked that stretching is probably not a good way to protect injuries. We also talked that tendons actually, with the work from Luc van Loom, the turnover is as high as the quadricep muscle, so we can actually have an influence on them. But now I'll bring you to another researcher who's called Andy Jones. And Andy Jones did a really, really elegant research, was basically to evaluate the flexibility of different long-distance runners and sprinters. And he showed that the ones that had more stiffness had more economy and were better runners. And so when we're looking as a coach at our athletes, we want to create stiffness, which is awesome. But the thing is that we see a lot of athletes now, the very kind of popular, sexy things for athletes to do is plyometrics. And we see a lot of injuries now with plyometrics popping up because, and we'll probably have another Coach Café specific for plyometrics, but probably there's some progressions there that are not well done, but also there are some things that probably we should go do along the plyometrics to reduce the injuries. And so when we're looking at injuries, the other question is, are there sex differences between male and female? And so we'll also address that, because is it a one-size-fits-all where the training should be the same? Turns out not. So let's look at different things here. What the Abrahamsen brothers, it's mainly Emil Abrahamsen, but what the Abrahamsen brothers did is that instead of doing the traditional max hold, where you hold it for 4 or 5 seconds, and then you take 3 minutes break, what they were doing is that they were doing 10-second holds, where their feet were still on the ground, but they were just kind of pulling as much as they could, and they would take 50 seconds break, they would do that with different holds, and they would do that for 10 minutes. So it was a sub-maximal isometric hold. Isometric means that there's no movement. So they're just pulling as hard as they could isometrically for a total session duration of 10 minutes, and they had big, big improvements, and their injuries went down. Okay, so we have something called isometrics, and we have something called max contraction isometrics. So where I would like to go with this now is to bring about kind of some properties of tendons and ligaments. So we have these two enzymes. One of them is called lysyl oxidase, and lysyl oxidase is the one that will build the crosslinks of collagen in the tendons and increase the stiffness. So when you're doing ballistic things like, say, plyometrics or jumping with a weight, or just like your physical activity in general, you are increasing the amount of lysyl oxidase, and so you're increasing the amount of crosslinks. The thing though with this is that we know that estrogen, so women have more estrogen, it reduces the ability of lysyl oxidase to create crosslinks by about 80%. And so this is one of the reasons why women or female athletes have way less muscle pulls. And so if I have a more compliant tendon, so remember the tendon is pulling on the muscle, if I have a more compliant tendon, there's going to be less stress on the muscle. And this is why, because female athletes have more estrogen, they have more compliant tendons, and so they tend to have less muscle injuries. But because their tendons are, if you want, less strong, because there's less crosslinks, they have 4 to 6 times more ACLs. And so we're also going to address how to address the differences between male and female when we look at tendons. Okay, so there's several things that we're looking at here. Now, before I go into more details, there's this other enzyme called prolyl hydrolyl oxidase. And this is the one that kind of packages collagen to make it ready so that the muscle can use it. And it needs vitamin C. And in the morning when we wake up, we don't have much vitamin C. And the amino acids that are found, if you want, in tendons and ligaments, we don't necessarily eat a ton of them. The research is new on this, but the research that is out there is showing that if you take 15 grams of collagen with 50 milligrams of vitamin C, and this vitamin C could be just like orange juice, and you take this maybe an hour to 30 minutes before your training sessions, that it will help to have enough vitamin C so the prolyl hydrolyl oxidase can do its job, and also so that you have the building blocks to build stronger tendons and ligaments. So nutritionally, we know that collagen, 15 grams, with 50 milligrams of vitamin C, 30 minutes to an hour before, can help us with building stronger tendons and ligaments. Okay, so we now have a strategy on the nutritional aspect of it. Now when we're looking at prevention and tendon health and all that, we need to look at the properties of the tendons and ligaments. So if I take a tendon and I was to pull on it really, really fast, the tendon's going to be very, very stiff. But if I keep this tension for a long time, there will be something that's called creep. And so in about 30 seconds, the tendons is going to elongate the way that the tension will be at 45%. And this is important if I have a tendon injury, because those crosslinks, those collagen crosslinks that are injured, when I pull on them very, very quickly, maybe I haven't pulled on those crosslinks that are injured. I've pulled on all the ones that are around because of how the mechanics of the tendon works, because it's viscoelastic. But if I keep pulling on it for a long time, I get creep, and then eventually I get to those fibers that are injured. And so when someone has an injury at the tendon, for health, just like the Abrahamson brothers from Norway found, if you do sustained 30-second contractions, and the intensity is lower, obviously, because the time is longer, you take a break and you repeat that, and you do that for about 10 minutes, we know that that can really, really help with tendon health and injury. So you can make the tendon more compliant. You can reduce the inflammation because some of the fluid is coming out of the tendon, and then when you release the contraction, the fluid that contains the nutrients around will go into the tendon. And you're also breaking some of the crosslinks that happen from inflammation. And you're giving a stimulus to build crosslinks, but because there is a tension, those crosslinks will be in now the direction of the pull. And so they're actually going to be stronger. So doing 30-second holds, doing several of those can actually build stronger tendons. And I think the most beautiful example of this is that Dr. Keith Barr was actually helping with the rehabilitation of a basketball player who had a hole in his patellar tendon. And over the course of a year, with the nutritional strategy of having 15 grams of collagen and some vitamin C, and doing isometrics, long hold isometrics, they saw with MRIs that actually they got rid of the hole. And so the tendon got stronger. And the other thing too is that we know that tendons get stronger like the rings of a tree. So you're adding more rings around. And it was thought before that the center was only influenced up to like 17 years old or something like this. But with these longer holds, it's suspected now that actually you can address the inside of the tendon. So if you're someone who does a lot of like ballistic work, or if you do like a lot of change directions and you have a lot of jerk, for the health of your tendon, it would be interesting to do in your training program these 30-second holds so that you can sustain the amount of training that you do. So think about runners. The more threshold you do, the more impact you have, the more likely you are to have an injury. And so doing these like 30-second holds could be very, very protective for you so that you can keep training. Okay, so we talked about creep and we talked about long isometrics. Now, what was interesting in the study that just came out from Gilmore, Glimek, and Abrahamson and Keith Barr was that they looked at these climbing apps, and so they tested the Abrahamson brother protocol, which increases your tendon and ligament health. But what they also saw, they had another cohort that did these max holds in addition to these long holds. And what they saw is that they actually got more benefits. So both of them are beneficial, but if you put them together, you have this additive beneficial effect. And so if you're an athlete and you're prone to injuries, doing long isometrics, those 30 seconds, in addition to max isometric holds, like 4-second max hold, would be very, very beneficial. Okay, cool. So now you have a more compliant tendon, the tendon health is increased. Fantastic. Now, the other thing that we need to introduce is the concept of jerk. So jerk is when you have this like change of acceleration. So think about me doing a power, like a clean, right? The weight is pulling me down, but I'm pulling up. That's a jerking motion. Think of me dropping off a box and then jumping up. Gravity's pulling me down, but I'm pushing up. That's a jerk. And we know that jerk is a very, very potent stimulus to lay down more cross-link, activate lysyl oxidase so that my tendons can become stiffer. And we said at the onset that stiffer tendons increase more economy, more speed. So for athletic performance, I need to be able to become more stiff. Okay, so plyometrics, very good to increase stiffness. But what the research is showing is that actually if you take a weight that's between 0 and 30% of your weight, and you do say like rapid jumps, where there's more jerk, that's actually one of the most potent stimulus to increase the stiffness of the muscle. Fantastic, cool. So we went over jerk. So now we know, okay, if I have movements with jerk, that's going to increase the stiffness, which is good for economy of movement, which is good for speed, it's good for athletic performance. But as my tendon gets stiffer, my risk of injury becomes more. Okay, so then we also saw that we have the viscoelastic property, and we saw that if I do long isometrics in combination with short isometrics that are more intense, that can really be protective for my tendon. So that's great, but now it's kind of like, okay, we talked about this male versus female difference. Well, what we know is that because female athletes have more estrogen, have more lysyl oxidase, and they're more likely to get ACL injuries, for female athletes, it's actually more beneficial for them to increase tendon stiffness. And so we want, from the research, female athletes to do more jerking movements because their muscles are less likely to get pull. They're less likely to get muscle pulls or muscle injuries. They're more likely to get tendon injuries. And so for them to do jerking motion is actually more beneficial and protective. Say they have an injury, then maybe we want to do isometrics, but otherwise doing more jerking action will help them to perform better and will help to protect the tendons and ligaments. Okay, cool. But now let's say I have a male athlete who's had a lot of muscle pull. And we know that male athletes tend to get more muscle pull because they don't have estrogen. So lysyl oxidase does more work, and so they get stiffer tendons. If the tendon is so stiff but the muscle is not strong enough, they'll get a muscle pull. So for male athletes, it's more important to do these like long, slow isometrics, these maximum isometrics, because it's not just about the tendon, but it's also about the muscle. So the muscle is going to get stronger. So what we're looking here is the speed of contraction. If I'm doing a slow contraction, the viscoelastic property of the tendon is allowing me to stretch it more so I can get to more cross links. And if I'm doing it in 5 seconds, maybe I'm not getting to all the cross links, but I can still increase the strength. If I do a longer contraction, I can actually get to all the cross links. And so if I have any kind of injury or injury risk, or if I want to do tendon building, I'll do longer contractions, okay? And we know that this strength is actually going to reduce the risk of injury by 2/3, okay? And it might be different from population from like male to female. So it's a lot about the speed of contraction that is important. Cool. So now let's say you're asking, okay, well, Simon, you just said that if I have long contractions and if I have isometric contractions of like 4 seconds, it's going to be good for my tendon health, but this is going to make a more compliant tendon, and what we're looking at is performance. Well, to perform, you need to stay healthy. And so one way how you might do this with an athlete, especially a male athlete, is that at the beginning of the season, you might want to have long isometrics and shorter isometrics that are heavy, so you can have this additive effect, like in the research that was published by Gilmore. But as I'm coming closer to the peak, I might reduce some of these long isometrics and slow maximal movements. But throughout the training, I want to have jerking movements. So those could be plyometrics, they could be jumps with weights, they could be different things like this. And as I get closer to the competition, I might increase these so that I'm more stiff and reduce the amount of slow strength. And so this would be a peak. And during a peak, my performance goes up, but my risk of injury also goes up. And so this is where you have to navigate it. But you could also tailor it from athlete to athlete. Say you have an athlete who's extremely strong, but is not very bouncy or very fast, but they've never had a muscle pull before, they've never had a tendon injury. Well, perhaps you could prioritize more like plyometrics and fast strength with that athlete. But on the contrary, if you have an athlete that's like very, very fast, very, very bouncy, but they get a lot of muscle pulls, well, potentially, you don't really need to be training the fast jerking movements like plyometrics and things like that. And perhaps for them, it's more doing these long isometrics and these heavy, slow movements so that their muscle and their tendons can stay healthy, so they can keep doing that, and then you just back off that right before they peak. And so I think the idea behind all this is to give some education for athletes and coaches, and to understand that it's not a one-size-fits-all with training, but it's really there's a sex difference, and there's also a phenotype difference. So the athlete that presents in front of you, you kind of have to have an idea of who they are, how they present, and then you can tailor these things and try these different things with them. And the idea is always to learn, so trial and error. You try something and you see if you've learned anything. So I hope this was useful. This is what I've learned recently, and I've found it very, very interesting. Now I would like to show you kind of different ways how we do it, because there's some common things that I see, and I would just like to share it with everyone, especially with young athletes, so that they can start to incorporate these things and have ideas as to how you can incorporate these things into your training every day so that you can stay healthy and you can keep progressing and you can be more consistent. So let's switch gears right now, and then I'm just going to show you different exercises and ideas that I've incorporated with the varsity teams that I coach, and also in the sports school that I coach, and different things like that. Okay, so I'll show you different things that we do for, say, someone has rolled their ankle or something like that. So I like to get these big bands, rubber bands, but this could be a belt. I'm going to put it on the toes, and this band is so hard that I'm not really able to move it. Then I'll put a small dumbbell between my heels, and this is just giving me something from which to push off. So when I'm in this position, I can dorsiflex, so I can raise my foot, or I can point my feet. I hope you're able to see on the camera. Basically, when the athlete has an injury, I'm just trying to get them to point their feet and then raise their feet and find what position they feel like it's that position that they're like, oh yeah, that's the point where I have an injury. Some athletes also say that if they point one toe as they lift the other toe, it's okay. But the idea is to then push the toes out as hard as you can and keep it there for 30 seconds. And this will help you with the lateral part of the ankle. And so you just hold it 30 seconds, take a break, and then repeat it a couple of sets, and your session total can be like 10 minutes. Now, you could also do max contractions where you're doing the same thing, but instead of like holding it for 30 seconds, you're just pushing as hard as you can for 4 seconds. Repeat that 5 times, do a couple of sets. Say now it's like more the inside of the ankle. You could use a belt, something like this. You could attach a weight to the belt, and this would be pulling your foot in. And again, you can point your toe or you can lift your toes, and you're looking for that position that feels uncomfortable. And like we talked about, it's about holding the contraction for like a good while so that you can have more creep, and so that the tendon starts to elongate, and so that you can actually get to the scar tissue. And then that scar tissue, if it's not aligned with the direction of the pull, it starts to break it down. And then it also stimulates lysyl oxidase to start to lay down some more collagen crosslinks to make it stronger. And so it's helping with the compliancy of the tendon, it's helping with some of the inflammation of the tendon, it's helping with the recovery. Now, yeah, just a side note too, that it's not because you're doing long isometrics and short, heavy isometrics that you're ready to return to play. There's a longer protocol, so there would be like some plyometrics, there'd be some endurance in different directions and things like this. This is just one part of it, so just take this with a grain of salt. And I wouldn't start with the heavy isometrics if you just had an injury. I would start with just the long, slow isometrics, and after a while you can test out the kind of more intense isometrics and see if those are good. Once both of those are good, then I would probably go into something like plyometrics, but that will be an entirely different video. Now I want to show you the ones, because I see a lot of runner's knee, what you could do for runner's knee. Okay, for anyone who has jumper's knee or knee pain that's in the front here, something very simple that you could do, or say that you're like in a sport where there's a lot of deceleration and you just want to strengthen your knees. If you want to do any long isometrics, doing something like a wall sit, where you just push sit and push against the wall. The further out you put your feet, obviously, the more pressure there'll be on the feet, and then you could lift one leg and try to hold this position for 30 seconds. So again, the time will create the creep, which will help you address those fibers and yeah, give you more tendon health. Now, say you wanted to do the portion of the protocol, because it's additive, where you're doing the max strength. You can again do this, but then you could just push as hard as you can, try to push your hip against the wall as hard as you can for 5 seconds. But you could also use like a wedge. So something that looks like this. So it's an angled platform, and then I could use a bench, say behind me. I could use some dumbbells. And so now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be putting all my weight on that front leg, and then I'm going to be going down, loading the knee, holding it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, come back up, and again 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Take a rest. I could go more intense. Other things that I could also do is I could use like a leg extension machine where I go up with 2 legs, which is quite heavy, and then I could take one leg off and just go nice and slow down with the other one. That would be another way to have quite a bit of load. Although when there's movement, there's less creep. So it's better apparently to keep it isometric. So I hope this is helpful. I hope it's giving you some ideas as like how you can periodize for tendon health, and also what you can do to just maintain tendon health, so to allow you to be consistent with the rest of your training. I hope you enjoyed it, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Give us some comments, give us some feedback on the video, how we could improve these, and if you have different ideas. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Tell them don't forget to like and subscribe.
Olivia would like me to tell you all and remind you all to like and subscribe if you would like to see more of these videos. Thank you so much.